Hello and good morning. Now you've got me by myself today, which is either a burden or a joy, I'm not sure which. But at any rate, I thought I'd take the opportunity of talking a bit about Felixstowe, because we all live here and it's the most wonderful place. Now I don't know how many people know it, I learnt it from the council of course, that why was Felixstowe such a place? And I was impressed to learn that the Empress of Germany, this is way back in Victorian days, she was ill. And of course she had to have somewhere to go to convalesce. And as they do when they've got all the money in the world, they sent an ambassador and he visited every town on the east coast and on the south coast. And blow me down, where do you think he chose? Dear old Felixstowe. And of course, I wondered why he chose Felixstowe. And of course I investigated and I've come up with my own theories. Now you might like to check them out yourself and see what you think. You might find that they're right or they're wrong. Now obviously we're on the east coast, but strangely enough Felixstowe, or the part of Felixstowe, faces south, which of course, as you know, if you're facing south you get the sun all day long. Now in this room here we're filming this in our headquarters, which is next door to the Floodiers, so we get the sun, and the sun rises over there and it comes over the whole day there and sets over this side here. So in other words, we must be facing south because the sun rises in the east, sets in the west. So this is a good thing. Now why is Felixstowe so good? And the reason is there's an estuary, a stretch of water which goes down by the ferry and it goes through to Ipswich. Then on the other side we've got the other estuary, by the port. So in effect Felixstowe's on a block of land by itself with water down either side. And of course that block of land heats up by the sun, and being separate, it creates its own little environment. And I think what happens is the hot air, it heats up hotter than the land surrounding it. The hot air rises, takes the clouds away, so we can have a lovely sunny day here in Felixstowe, but you drive into Ipswich and of course it becomes cloudy. Now I recently, I have someone to look after me, a new member of staff. She lives in Ipswich, Tina, a lovely girl. I'm hoping to interview her sometime, but she comes in and she thought I was talking nonsense when I said Felixstowe's got its own climate and it's much better than anywhere else. And now, the other day, she said to me, she said, I think you're right. She said, I can be driving in from Ipswich, and she said, part of the way, the weather starts to get better, and when I get to Ipswich, it's a lovely day. So it's spot on, isn't it? Now, I don't know whether you know where the Empress of Germany lived, but if you go down Hamilton Road, the main road, at the bottom there's our television premises and radio premises on the corner. Then you go down Bent Hill, and on the left there's a big white house, and apparently that is where the Empress of Germany lived. Now what's surprising, what's always puzzled me, at any rate, I don't know whether you've thought the same, but Brighton, you remember, I think it was the Prince Regent, he went to Brighton, and about the same period, Victorian days, and Brighton became a huge flourishing town. Now why didn't Felixstowe become such a huge flourishing town like Brighton? We should have been like a Brighton on the east coast, but of course we didn't. And I've puzzled my brain and I've come up with an answer. Now see what you think. You mightn't agree with me, of course, but I wonder whether it's because they knew the Empress of Germany were coming, and they built this huge hotel, Harvest House. You all know it. If you go along the seafront, there's this huge hotel there, or was a hotel. It's a lovely block of flats now, or flats. And I wonder whether because they had all the money in the world, they built the place so it went right down to the seafront. And of course today you've got the Spa Theatre, on the seafront, but you cannot, and it's one of the only towns in England where you can't walk right along the promenade. And the result is that you've got all of Felixstowe, the pier and all the amusements and everything like that on one side. Then you come up to this Spa Theatre and you're blocked. You've got to come up into town, up Bent Hill. And of course this end of the town, completely neglected. And I think that's the reason why Felixstowe isn't a Brighton today. It's because you can't walk straight along the promenade. Had they not done that, we'd today be a vast place. So I'm very grateful to whoever thought of that. But I'm very impressed with the fact that you've got that huge block of flats there. Well, it was the old hotel, but apparently down on the basement there's a vast shopping arcade, but it's all blocked up. So one of these days somebody's going to have to open it up again, because I think that would be a brilliant thing to do. Now, I'm wondering whether if you ever want to do a walk round Felixstowe, we've got an amazing contrast, because if you start down at Langard Forth, I don't know whether, I'm sure you've been to Langard Forth, but it's amazing the number of people that don't know the interesting things which are going on. And our cameraman Paul, who's here now, he's just done a magnificent piece on Langard Fort, and we're going to put it on, so I'm hoping you'll look out for that piece and watch it, because it's well worth seeing. But we're very historical in Felixstowe. As you know, there's Martello Towers all the way along. Some of them have been pulled down where the old hospital was, where the new Bartlett flats are. There was a Martello Tower there. In fact, that big building is apparently, so I understand, built on the base of a Martello Tower. So who knows? But the Martello Towers, when you think about it, is absolutely incredible how they used to have them at this short distance apart. And when you think of the cost of building them and the fear in people's hearts to see these great big forts going up every few hundred yards, the fear of invasion, it makes you really consider. But as I say, here we are in Felixstowe, and I personally think that the Empress of Germany, when she sent this ambassador around all the towns, and she picked Felixstowe as being the best town there is for her to convalesce in, she was spot on, and we today are still very lucky to be living here. Now, I'm just going to go back and, I've been doing my life, and I can't remember which episode this is, but we're into our 30s, and when you think that it's half an hour each episode, or roughly half an hour, it's either I've been talking a lot or I've had a lot through my life. Now basically, I worked it out the other day that in my lifetime, I'm 90 now, so at least my brain is still functioning, which is something. But I've just had a very serious operation. I've lost half my stomach, but I'm determined I'm not going to give in to it. I'm going to plug on. But the trouble is, my brain isn't as sharp as it used to be, and even now, Mike, he's my wonderful person who usually interviews me. He didn't turn up this morning, so we had the camera and everything was ready. So we got going, and I said, well, I'll try it out. You see, I go back to television when it first started. I think I've told you this before, but when it first started, we do it as I do it now. We used to talk to the camera, we didn't rehearse it, we didn't script it, and it was straight to camera. And of course today you don't see that at all. They script it, they rehearse it, and they'll spend days to produce a few minutes television. Now I'm hoping that proves that it's live. Our phone is going, but fortunately somebody will answer it, I hope, in a moment. But going back, as I say, I go back to the days when we used to do it like that. Television, of course, is coming back to that. In Norwich, the BBC, they have a number of people, they've given them cameras, they've sent them out and said, just do 5 minutes or 2 minutes on the news. And of course, so it's going in the same direction. But it's much more fascinating when you think of it to do it as we used to do it, straight to camera, no rehearsals, and it relied on your own brain. But it's much more like having a conversation with somebody, and it's only I'm just talking to you, and that's what it's all about. But I want to go back now. I'm thinking when I first started in television, we did a program called Pure Invention, and I had 14 inventions. I had a family of 33 children and had to support them, unfortunately, and in those days there was no money. This was after the war. Children's homes with 400 and 600 children in them. They were shipping the children off to Canada and America, Australia, all over the place, and there was no money. If people took them today, if you have a child into your family, they pay you adequate money to support them. In those days they didn't, and we had 9 blood children, and of course we lost our first child. And my wife, being an angel, we were married for 65 years. She's been dead for 3 years now. So, but she was an angel. Anybody who can put up with me for that time, they must be an angel or something. But we lost our first one, and being so good-natured, she said, well, there's so many unwanted children, we must try and find a child to replace the one blood child we've lost. And of course we went to the authorities and said, well, we want to find a baby. They said, well, everybody wants babies, but it was a baby girl we thought we'd have. And they said, everybody wants girls, but nobody wants boys. So it's all right, we'll have a baby boy, that's all right. And they said then, well, of course everybody wants baby boys, but nobody wants the older boys. So we went along, and it was a great joy to us. We found a 7-year-old boy, and he's our eldest son. He's now in his 70s, and they said he'll never amount to anything. He's a complete genius. He's written books, he's got vast enterprises. He became the best photographer in Sydney. I'm very proud of him. In fact, he came over from Australia last month, and it was a joy to see him and his family. So we're very proud of Blair and Rhonda and our grandchildren out in Australia. But it just shows you how life changes and times change, because at that time we of course the authorities then got wise to us. They said, well, here's a couple of suckers, and they came to us and said, look, we've got a family here of 5, and if nobody takes them, they're going to be, the eldest girl has gone over 5, and we'll have to split them up. But of course the problem is that if they're split up like that, they never see, in those days, they never saw one another ever again. So we had this family came to us, and there's a lot going on around me, so my mind is getting distracted. I'm awfully sorry. And that was the beginning of our huge family. We ended up with 33 children. But we had a lot of problems. You have no idea, because talking like this, it reminds me, we had a girl called Betty to help us. And she had in those days they used to call them illegitimate babies, which of course it's nonsense. But she came to us and we had her, and we never thought there was anything wrong with her. And one day I had bred ducks, and I had about 10 ducks. And one day they all disappeared, and I said to the milkman, I don't know what's happened to our ducks. He said, well, I think you ought to ask Betty. And it turned out that Betty had sold them all and taken the money herself. Another little trick she got up to, in those days, of course, there was they had sickness benefit, but it was a very small amount, and I'd never claimed it. I mean, today benefits, quite rightly, are, the mainstay of life for a lot of people. But I was ill, and I thought, well, I'll claim my sickness benefit. And I suddenly, after a delay of several weeks, I got a cheque for, I can't remember, some small amount, and I thought, well, that's very odd, nobody could live on that. So I phoned them up. They said, but we've been sending you that amount every week. And I said, well, I've never got it. They said, well, it's been cashed. They came back to me, they checked on it. It's been cashed in London. Well, we were living in Seaford in Sussex, and I checked. I said, what day of the week was it cashed? And of course it turned out that it was the day that she had off, and she always went up to London, Betty, and it turned out, of course, it took me half an hour questioning before I could get her to admit that she'd taken it, so it just shows you. But investigated her, and I found that she was a London prostitute, and she'd always told me that her baby was the child of this famous pianist, and of course I sent her down to the solicitor. I thought he ought to be supporting her, and he checked around, he phoned me back, he said, well, she's actually a prostitute and she doesn't know who the father of the baby is. But it just shows you how times have changed, and but I think that I've reached a point where I don't know how long I've been talking, but I've been talking long enough, so I'm going to wish you all goodbye. God bless you, and just thank you, lucky stars, you're living in such a wonderful place. I know the docks are owned by the Chinese, but we should welcome the Chinese, because we don't realise they're a huge economy. We are owned very largely by the Chinese all the way through England. And I remember after the war, I've got myself off on something else, which I think is interesting. After the war, the Chinese had Chinese restaurants springing up everywhere. And I used to go around and say, well, one of these days the Chinese are going to own the world. And of course they do. We've got the lovely old, I don't know whether you remember, lovely old Midland Bank, real English bank. And what is it now? It's HSBC, Hong Kong Banking Corporation, HSBC. It's in every town. So we should be very grateful to the Chinese. They're a lovely race. I know several of them, beautiful people, so be proud. And of course they own our docks here, and which they spend a lot of money on, I might add. And I understand they're building another dock somewhere else, so it's going. But at any rate, it's been great talking to you. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope I haven't bored you to tears by myself talking to you. But you can think in terms of television. You've gone back right to the beginning of television when this used to be the norm. Take care, God bless you, and I hope everything goes well for you today. Goodbye.